So, about a year ago, I had my sister try out Super Mario 64 without any context for the series. She isn't super well versed in playing games, but she does have a handle on controlling characters in a 3D environment. Unfortunately, the family doesn't really let my sisters play a lot of games, so I had to borrow her while everybody was gone. In the end, she took maybe 45 minutes or so from turning the game on to getting the very first star on Bob-on Battlefield. Not bad for her first time. The game encourages you to experiment with the controls and feel how Mario moves in the environment without too much tutorial needed. Part of the fun is just trying things out, from running around to a leap of faith across a gap. But what about a game that requires a little more finesse? Hello everyone, it is so good to see you. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time was the very first 3D Zelda. At its core, the idea was to take A Link to the Past for the Super Nintendo and translate it into a truly, fully explorable world. Ideas like utilizing heightened puzzles or the application of first person in a Zelda game are commonplace now, but it was extremely ambitious at the time. And beyond that, you have to find a way to teach players how all this works together. Whether they have played Zelda before, if this is their first time in the series, or maybe even their first video game ever, how do you communicate and contextualize how Z-targeting works? How to jump from one platform to the next? How fire can interact with different objects? Can we organically explain this without menu after menu of tutorials popping up, or a big controller with lines pointing to buttons to tell us what to do? A lot of the people watching this have played Zelda to the point where its language and logic is second nature to us. But what about someone who's never interacted with the series before? Does the design and guidance provided still work as intended in the year 2026? Super Mario 64 was easier and forgiving in that way, but my sister Alma is going to have a bit more of a challenge ahead of her, as I asked one thing of her: clearing the very first dungeon. Can she do it? Let's see some of the highlights, as we also study everything leading up to the boss inside the Great Deku Tree. Not everybody is in a position where we can show a younger kid a Zelda game for the first time. It's pretty funny and ironic to look at Navi from the perspective of someone who is trying to guide a new player. I wanted to be as hands-off as possible and let Alma discover what to do. Because of this, I was relying on Navi and the other NPCs to guide her in the right direction. The girl on top of the shop is pretty annoying for forcing us to halt our progress every single run, but Alma learned a valuable lesson in targeting because of her. I became a fellow know-it-all brother, and I taught her some of the basics of the controller myself, since I did, in fact, give her the N64 controller for this. She's getting the authentic experience. She was also asking why all those weird circles were on top of the screen. I explained that those were the buttons that you press, and for somebody new to the N64 controller, or at least someone that doesn't play it very often, simply finding and remembering where they all were became another challenge in itself. But this is partly why the UI is mapped and colored like the controller. Zelda is one of the only franchises in this era that plops the controller itself on the screen at all times, since you map the items yourself. Honestly, it looks a bit tacky, but it stuck and became sort of an identity for the series in 3D going into the Wind Waker and beyond. Learning the buttons aside, it was important for Alma to understand how Link moves. At the very least, this is not the first game where she controls a character in 3D. What would you say is your favorite game right now, Alma?
My favorite game right now is probably Kirby and Forgotten Land.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you've been playing. You, pretty much did almost everything in that on your own.
Yeah.
Compared to Kirby and Mario, Link moves a bit slower and his actions are very contextual with the environment. She was trying very hard to cross this skinny bridge, but the way Link has 2 speeds for a new player was making it a very difficult thing to get a hold of. This somehow became our first challenge. Can you make it across this bridge without falling?
Oh, please. No, no, no.
Oh no!
No, no, no. Bro.
It's a little tricky. After many tries, I did eventually recommend Z-targeting to lock into one direction, which helped as he very daintily crossed the cursed bridge. I know I could have saved that for later, but she was very adamant on getting across, which she did. She might have missed talking to the girl, but she did earn her first blue rupee from it. And that's when we discovered the sweet allure of money. Throwing rocks, running in bushes, finding our first chest. You also see how the dialogue very cleverly integrates teaching you with story fluff as well. It might on occasion throw the actual face button into the text window, but for the most part this helps prevent breaking immersion. It makes it feel more like you're looking into a world and not a screen. I always appreciate it when a game can do that. We looked all over for rupees and even discovered running off ledges to do a jump. Miyamoto would have been tickled from all the bonus rupees we were gaining this way. Really though, watching someone actually take the time to look everywhere and not just go straight for the sword and shield, it was nice. There are some houses I know some of us haven't gone inside of for years, and what a shame too, there's some good money to steal from these kids. After making enough money to go shopping, we got the Deku shield. Now to find the sword, which did take a moment because we kept getting distracted by everything in the environment. Whether I'm a kid or an adult, getting into these tiny tunnels is and always will be kind of a pain. Beyond this tunnel is where we met our biggest threat yet, as one of my sisters called it, a giant rolling ball of chocolate. Alma has been reading almost every sign so far, some not very helpful. Those signs will soon pay now that she has finally gotten her first sword.
Yay,
You got the Kokiri sword! We realized, hooray, now we can see the Great Deku Tree, and oh no, I gave my sister a sharp weapon. And so the joy of cutting and accidentally discovering signs you can vandalize began. Forest folk shall not leave these woods. Unfortunately, Alma didn't like being told what to do, and now nobody can read the warning sign. What if someone leaves and they don't know they're not supposed to?
Oh, that's
Too bad for them.
yeah, too bad.
What? Oh my goodness. That just caught me off guard. One of the best moments of this sequence was that her first instinct was to try and cut Mido out of the way instead of just talking to him. You can't cut him. That would be mean. Why was your first instinct to cut Mido up? I don't know why I found that so funny. Fairy hovered and pointed at the nearest target, so she started cutting. She's got the right idea, I guess. We also discovered the frustrations of repeated dialogue with very slow text, for good measure. Don't talk to him again! No! What are you doing? And thus is what many of us has fallen victim to, being stuck in talking to very long texts. Okay, walk away. Walk away. Okay.
Control your anger.
You need to hit the bad things. And through all of this, my sister is slowly but surely learning the values of everything Zelda has to offer, from rupees to new items. You got a stick!
What's so great about a stick?
It's more important than you might think. We spent over half an hour in this area. That's absurdly long for most of us, but it's so different when you're exploring the world of Zelda for the first time. There's kids who look like you, who are your age, everyone has a fairy, and she, along with my other sisters watching, and did catch that the Kokiri do not grow up. I was wondering if they were going to make a connection to Peter Pan, being such big Disney fans, but that didn't happen. Was sort of glad about that, this saved me a lot of things to explain. Despite being such a small playground, you get a good amount of space to experiment with how Link interacts with the environment without being forced into any tutorials. There aren't any kids who force you to pick up rocks or clear out the grass. They just exist in the environment for you to interact with if you want to. It's nice. After acquiring our first sticks, we approach and enter the Great Deku Tree. Or at least we did, after Alma decided to help and speed up his inevitable death. This is going to be your first dungeon, and you're going to have to be solving puzzles here. Why would you cut the tree? Stop it! He has enough problems inside. This is with the inside of the tree.
Oh.
And so began the real challenge. The Great Deku Tree was a lot of firsts for the Zelda franchise. This was our proof of concept to see if we could take the fundamentals of the series and apply it to a 3D environment. It is rather vertical, which could only be accomplished in this way thanks to the N64, and the team immediately jumped at the chance to try it out. We weren't boxed into square rooms anymore. Paths could become much more organic, like a tree, and interconnect in more complicated ways than ever before, branching out very much like a tree. But it had to have a level of balance. It couldn't be too complicated or else you lose the player's focus. That is some of the mastery that goes into dungeon design. Make it too simple and you bore or fail to engage the players. Make it too convoluted and obscure without the proper telegraphing and players might lose interest. Ocarina of Time really needed to focus on guiding the player just enough to keep them invested, while also allowing them that aha moment after solving a puzzle. There is so much to observe about game design in the Deku Tree, many which go right over our heads. Ladders are bright and easy to read as a climbable object, but Navi makes a point to inform you that vines are climbable too. Alma immediately experimented with this after being told, and then got tackled by a spider. Okay, can't climb this for now. The first actual puzzle in this was the Deku Scrub. How do you fight this thing when all it does is hide away when you get close? With a little nudge, I reminded Alma that Navi can give you a hint when you're stuck. And from her hints, she thought you could bounce the nuts back with the swipe of a sword, which, I mean, fair? You can eventually bounce some things back with your sword in the game, but that didn't seem to work here. Going back in a second time, she tried the shield right away. Thinking critically, it is kinda silly logic, isn't it? Nuts aren't bouncy like that. It can absolutely be argued that Alma's line of thinking made much more sense and should be the answer here, since Link is using forward force to volley an object back from where it came from, like a game of tennis. But that was one of the first lessons that we learned in Ocarina of Time as far as combat goes. Hyrule has its own laws. With the slingshot in hand, we discover a classic trick used in Zelda, Metroid, and more, requiring you to use the item that you just got to leave the room. I left her to do her thing for quite a while until she thought to play with the slingshots. The initial shock of the game going right into first person caused a bit of a whiplash. Real sad that we didn't have the option to invert the axis of the camera back then, but we started to make do as she tried to learn how this perspective functions. Once she played through it enough, we saw that Navi wanted to get her attention. How do we reach the ladder way up there? We pondered this for a while. There was no way to leave the room unless we did something. I think she was a little afraid to use the slingshot since there was a number and she thought she only had 30 shots for the whole game. But once I told her you can find more shots, she flung a couple at the ladder and oh, it made the ladder fall. This is a really great and simple room to teach the player what to expect from here on. If you get a new item, you'll probably have to use it right away to solve a problem. And by doing this, it gets you actively thinking how else this can interact with the environment of where you just were. Not long after re-entering the main room, Alma took the slingshot and took aim on the scutulas that kept her from climbing earlier. Of course, there's almost no way to tell exactly where the bullets are going to land, so we had to figure it out with some experimentation. Would have gone a little bit better if the controls weren't so sensitive. I told her we could get a little closer to aim, but she was determined and in the zone from where she stood. Something else that I grew to appreciate for Alma was that the game would warn you when a bad guy was nearby. The music would change within the proximity of an enemy, alerting you to be aware as it gets louder. That's some revolutionary stuff, honestly. Climbing up safely, we also encounter our very first big Skulltula. This is where I realized she doesn't really mind spiders, just hacked away at that thing first sight. But it did show her that some enemies can't all be attacked right away. As Zelda games will teach us, some creatures can only be attacked from behind. We were really going to learn just how useful the Z button is, from targeting to moving the camera around, and also how Navi will give us important information each time. After some contemplation and waiting, she took down her first proper enemy, and then ignored the next one that came down. We'll deal with it later. This room gave us some difficulty, and also threw elements that we're both familiar with and uncertain of. Alma learned that you can take out a Skulltula with your slingshot too, not just your sword. I wanted to see what she would have tried to solve first, from the enemies, to climbing the vines, to pressing the weird button. The little squares at the Kokiri forest, and the few obstacles on the way there, taught us that we can automatically jump when approaching a ledge. We learned that switches can activate a timed puzzle, and figured out that there must be a way to open the door along the other path. The struggles arose with the timed platforms, and she was starting to miss how Mario could have just made the jumps if he was there. Reaching the path straight across was easy, but it was harder to redirect yourself across the path on the left. Once you jump, Link just keeps going and you get almost zero directional influence. After a few tries, and getting fed up with this Deku Baba, she makes it and gets 1 heart. So the door is still locked. Does this thing that Navi's pointing to over here do anything? I tell her to look at her items because usually those can solve anything if you're stuck somewhere, like with the ladder stuck to the wall. It didn't take too long to realize, oh, sticks and wood burns. And a moment later, we were finally out of there. But now what? We explored every room so far, and oh great, the spiders are back. This part would be the most obtuse but interesting puzzle in the entire dungeon. I stayed quiet during a lot of this, and was pretty surprised to find how quickly she was catching on to what was happening here. Something smart and unique that the game does occasionally is pan the camera in a way that frames points of interest for the player. Alma kept approaching the very edge of this path, and I could see the gears in her head turning while staring at the web down below. Was she going to do this on her first try? This is one spot where there's nearly no telegraphing what to do, and in this position, none of your items are going to help you. It's more so using your own head and thinking about the environment around you, and how Link himself can contextually interact with it. After a couple of times of nearly falling right off, she made the leap of faith and missed. Not surprising. Again, you can't really control Link while he's in the air, but she totally had the right idea. And it wasn't until we tried this that we got the hint from Navi that you can look down below. Still not blatantly giving away what she needs to do either, but seeing the room below confirms that she needs to push down the spiderweb somehow, because she knows from real life experiences that spiderwebs are soft. Unfortunately, we had some difficulty getting this jump just right. If you push forward the entire time, Link will just overshoot himself and hit the floor. It's a little frustrating. The hole could be a bit bigger to compensate for players who push forward the whole way down like Alma. Above all else, I think the devs were simply more excited to show off what the N64 was capable of, and how they can apply that to the structure of the dungeon itself. In A Link to the Past, there were some dungeons in which you can fall down a pit and end up in a completely different room. But this was another display of ingenuity entirely. To go from the top floor down to the ground level and then down even further through the web, this was seamless and incredibly impressive, while also being the biggest aha moment in the game so far. By the time we made it underground, I was pretty confident that Alma could clear the dungeon. It may have taken about 45 minutes to get down to the bottom level, but at this point she's gotten more a handle on what to do and how to read what the game was asking of her. The tricky thing is at this point, it's only really Navi and the environmental clues keying you in on what to do here. We can swim, we can climb around and start playing with the environments. I think the only room that requires you to have an immediate response is the Deku that shows you how to reflect projectiles with your shield. And even then, it's very delayed, they're stationary, and it's easy to avoid the single enemy. Unlike areas dating back to the very first Zelda, you're not yet thrown into a room full of multiple enemies that want you to react. You can really blitz right through it if you know where you're going, or slowly examine your entire surroundings with no punishment. We spent quite a while just getting used to this place, and still getting frustrated at the inverted first-person camera. We saw that there were some shallow portions in the water and remembered that fire burns things. Oh, this guy again. After shielding, she had the most natural Alma reaction again. Cut and stab the thing trying to hurt you. Aw, but the guy just wants to talk to you and about a secret code. 23 is number 1. So this is a total side note, but do you know about this code? It was forced to get a bit lost in translation from the original meaning. In Japanese, 1 to 3 is Ichi ni san. The code is the same, 2, 3, 1. But if you say 2 and 3 together, Nissan, that's a way to address your older brother. Also, Ichiban is a word that means the best or number 1. So in Japan, they made a code into a rhyme, Nissan Ichiban, or Big Brother is number 1. You can't really turn that into a rhyme in English, so they opted to simply say 23 is number 1. Is this a reference to Michael Jordan, who was number 1 at the time? I don't know, man. I think it was just a coincidence. Anyways, Alma was really quick to experiment with what to do with her first Zelda eyeball. She actually used Deku nuts first, and it wasn't until after the recording that she told me she thought she could make the eye blink and close. That is such a different and yet still very logical deduction to make. If you cause something to flash, an eye would close or look away. That's just a natural human reaction, and it was fascinating to see someone come to such a conclusion that I've never heard of before. We are all so deeply pilled to hit distant eyeballs from far away with projectiles that I've never considered any other logically sound solutions. And that was her next guess, taking the slingshot and activating it that way. Felt my own eyes open and learned something here today. The spiked bar room was pretty self-explanatory once we found the switch. She got tested on time platforming earlier, and for quite a while, so this room was easier than I thought. Good old Navi jumped in to tell Alma about interesting things in the water and moving blocks without me having to say a word. Very helpful. Of course, we didn't have guys to tell us how to move blocks in ye olden top-down Zelda days, but don't worry about that, this is different. She does need to look down at the controller every so often to make sure she knows what color button is which. If you've seen Link just kinda randomly stop moving during any of this, that's probably why. The next room had more stationary enemies, and she was so excited to light up the torches that she didn't even cut up all the Deku Babas. I like how this next room deliberately puts the Skulltula with its weak point already facing you. Using the slingshot can help you avoid fighting this one altogether. Oh, but then there's the other problem, the weird baby Gomas. I was scared a little for her health, but she went in blindly swinging and somehow survived. Blind luck or actually the hero reborn? I'll let you decide. The craziest thing happened at this point when we were trying to get this Deku stick lit. See, we did manage to get to the web before it went out, but she wasn't sure how to burn it. I told her she can swing it like a weapon, and boy, she got swinging. She got swinging so much that she accidentally performed the infinite Deku stick glitch right in front of my eyes trying to light it again. Going back, I saw that she hit the chest and the torch with one swing, causing the glitch to take place, but I've never seen it performed in this scenario. I explained to her how that's not supposed to happen, and that it was really cool that she could do that. Unfortunately, this stick was not going to light our way to the final room. Personally, I never swing the stick when I'm trying to burn this web up. I usually just roll on the ground since it gets me there just a tiny bit faster. Also, just diabolical that there's torches here but they raise them up too high for a short little Link to reach. We finally got to the last room with 3 Deku Scrubs to fight off. I was thinking that since there are 3, she would know what to do right away. It took us a while. Also really peeves me that you have to chase this scrub down to talk to him or else he just hops back into his hole. But we did finally remember that 23 is number 1. With that, we reached the boss. Honestly, the only hint that I gave her after wandering in the dark for a bit was reminding her how to look in first person without a weapon, since she went right for violence using the slingshot. So what was one of the lessons we learned that we can correlate to this battle here? Alma thought about the eyeballs in the room a few areas back because she drew the slingshot almost right away. But those controls really made it difficult to aim, and Z-targeting hasn't been used enough to be second nature at this point. We also only have 3 hearts, so there's not a whole lot of room for error this early in the game. I believe this is the Zelda that first introduced having to stun an enemy before being able to attack it properly. The only example I could think of is when fighting Ganon in A Link to the Past. You need to stun him before using your bow and arrow to give him the finishing blow. But now, this is going to be a much more commonly used mechanic. And if you're not accustomed to this, you might be a little confused as to why your hits aren't working one way or another. Being a boss, Goma indeed suddenly asks you to up your reaction time, from when the eye is red to attacking while stunned. This showed and reminded me how small that window to hit it while the eye is red is. This was a little too difficult to manage all at once and with so little health. After a few tries and playing this game for over 2 hours total, she unfortunately did not manage to fully complete the Great Deku Tree. She also had to go somewhere, so I couldn't really keep her for any longer. Maybe we'll try again sometime. It's really quite fascinating to slow down and really take in something like this. It's a piece of history, but we're always so quick to speed right through it and see the rest of the game. Growing up, I got more interested in what makes games what they are structurally. All the ins and outs of dungeon design, how the assets were applied and reused, down to how enemies react to the player. This is what started a whole new chapter in the Zelda franchise, and my sister helped me to realize that we shouldn't take what we have, and what Zelda contributed to games making the jump to 3D, for granted. Overall, I think it does a very good job at guiding the player through a new, 3-dimensional explorable environment without being too aggressively handholdy. You can interact with the world and learn more information as needed, or you can just mess around safely in Kokiri Forest. You will more or less get a grasp of the controls and then head into your first dungeon. The game eases up on telegraphing things as you progress, but I think a lot of us can look back to a moment in the game where some more hinting would have been appreciated. I wanted to also briefly discuss Ocarina of Time 3D. About 13 years after the original, the game was reformatted to the 3DS with its fair amount of changes. You would think that perhaps in a world where Zelda has become much more popular over a decade later, there might not be as much tutorial. But the opposite holds true now. There is an area where you can crawl into a giant gossip stone and have every little detail spelled out for you, in case you need it. Kinda defeats the purpose of exploring and figuring it out for yourself. The option is still there for you to take that avenue, at least. This thing also shows up in Majora's Mask 3D. Just stop! Who invited you? I won't argue that some people will find this very handy, especially if this is their first Zelda game. But it makes me wonder, with the way that so many games have to throw pictures of controllers at you, sudden tutorial windows, and little friends popping up to remind you that the A button exists, is The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Remake going to be even more aggressive in telling you what to do? It seems like that would counter their more recent philosophy, considering Breath of the Wild threw you into a forest and told you to figure it out. That game hardly offers any tutorial, but that's also because it's much looser in structure. It's more of a sandbox where you can express yourself. In traditional Zelda, you need to go from point A to point B, usually. You need to use the slingshot to activate a switch, and later you need a key to get into a room. You want to know something funny I noticed playing Ocarina of Time for the N64 and the 3DS back to back? So think about the Forest Temple, your first big boy dungeon and one of the absolute best in terms of design and atmosphere. When you first enter, you see Link just walking through this little foyer like any other area. There's a couple of wolfos that you might fight them off, and then continue on your way into the main lobby. You wander around until you eventually realize, I'm missing a key somewhere. But I've been everywhere already, where's the key? Well, here's the kicker, that key is in the very first area in the foyer. And this always stands out as really strange and humorous to me. When you first enter, you might look around, but it's a very small room and the enemies and door directly in front of you might catch your attention right away. You beat the Wolfos, nothing happens or gets unlocked, so you think that's probably all there is to it. But if you look closer, you'll find there are some climbable vines that lead up to the top of an interior tree. Now there's a chest in sight. You hop over, and hopefully don't fall, to find a small key. Was I the only one to find this a little odd? There is just something about this foyer that feels as if there shouldn't be something so important in here. It gives me that feeling of, we're not actually inside yet, behind these doors is where the temple starts. Even though that's not true, we clearly see its safe forest temple upon entry. It feels like one of those sneaky chests that would have had 20 rubies in it, but it's actually an essential item hidden in plain sight. Do you happen to remember not finding this key? Did you also find yourself wandering around aimless in the forest temple just to realize the key was in the first room the whole time? Maybe that frustrated you, or maybe that was a memorable part of the experience here. But compare that to what happens when you enter the forest temple in the 3DS version. Well, look at that! I love how they made a very specific point to not only give it a cinematic intro, but also pan up just enough to tell you, hey, don't forget to look around and look up. It's such a funny, subtle, and realistic nod to the fact that maybe we as the devs shouldn't have put a key up in such a weird place for the game's first temple as adult Link. So I can't help but wonder, in what ways are we going to be helped and guided in Ocarina of Time's remake? Will it more or less be like the 3DS version in terms of guidance? Or will it be structurally different enough that we have to teach the players all over again? Is the general format of dungeons going to change? Or will this key still be in the first room of the Forest Temple? There will be an audience of people jumping straight from the Switch era of Zelda titles straight into this remake, so it's hard to say just how much they'll hold our hands. Because if my sister has taught me anything, it's that an 11-year-old is still plenty capable of learning a game as complex as Zelda without needing tutorial after tutorial served on a plate to them. The best games, in my opinion, teach you by show don't tell, allowing the player to mess around, experiment, and make mistakes to learn by. I'm not sure when and where things got so complicated that we had to tutorialize everything, especially in modern AAA studio games. There are series out there perfectly capable of achieving greatness by simply handing you a controller and saying, go. But that's all I had to say about this. I wanted to try the experiment I did with my sister playing Mario 64 a year ago, and ended up thinking a lot more critically about Zelda's entrance to 3D than I expected coming out of it. Maybe it gave you some things to think about too. As of this video, we don't really know anything about Ocarina of Time's remake other than the first teaser, so I'm really interested to see what the first areas like the Kokiri Forest and the Great Deku Tree look like. Perhaps I'll have Alma revisit the game in the remake and see if she can take down Goma in a rematch. Thank you all so much for watching, and keep an eye out for more Zelda this year. You might find them on our channel or up exclusively on our Patreon, so there's plenty to stick around for. Alright everyone, take care of yourselves. Till we meet again.